If you are flying in 2026, there is something important you need to understand before your next trip. Some of the biggest airline and airport changes were never clearly announced to ordinary travelers. They were buried in baggage policies, check-in rules, ID requirements, and silent system updates. Most people would never think to check. And that is why so many travelers are getting caught off guard. A bag that used to be fine now gets flagged. A fee appears where people were expecting none. An ID problem shows up at the worst possible moment. A deadline you never heard about suddenly matters. What makes this so frustrating is that these mistakes are not happening because people are careless. They are happening because the system changed quietly while most travelers kept relying on old habits. In this video, we are going through the 2026 travel changes that can cost you money, delay your trip, and create stress you could have avoided with the right preparation. Number 1. The airline you thought was still the cheapest. Let's start with the change that is catching a lot of travelers off guard. For years, Southwest had one big advantage people did not even think twice about. Bags flew free. That was more than just a nice perk. For many travelers, it was the reason to book Southwest without comparing too closely, because the airline felt simpler, safer, and often cheaper once baggage costs were factored in. But as of January 27, 2026, that familiar advantage is gone. Southwest ended its free checked bag policy, and the first checked bag now costs extra depending on the route and when you book. What makes this important is not just the fee itself. It is the habit that remains after the policy changed. A lot of travelers still book Southwest almost automatically because they are using yesterday's logic to make today's decision. They assume the airline is still the better deal for anyone bringing luggage. But once that bag fee is added back into the total, Southwest is not always the cheaper option anymore. And that is how money slips away. Not because people are careless, but because they are relying on an older version of the airline. So before you book your next flight, compare the full cost, not just the ticket price. In 2026, old travel habits can cost more than people realize. Number 2. Your carry-on is no longer being eyeballed. The next change matters because it hits people at the worst possible moment right at the gate, when there is no time to argue and no easy way to fix it. For years, many travelers got used to a loose system. If a carry-on looked close enough, there was a good chance it would pass. But that has changed. Starting in 2025 and becoming much more common through 2026, airlines like American, Spirit, and Frontier have been pushing gate agents to physically test bags in the sizer instead of simply glancing at them. That means a bag that looked fine enough at home may still get flagged at the airport. And once that happens, the decision usually moves fast. If the bag does not fit, you may be forced to check it on the spot and pay a gate check fee that can range from about $25 to $75 depending on the airline. In other words, this is no longer about whether your bag seems close. It is about whether it actually fits. That is why this catches so many people off guard. They are not trying to break the rules. They are trusting their eyes, their past experience, or the fact that the same bag worked before. But in 2026, worked before is no longer reliable. The smarter move is simply measure your bag at home with a real tape measure, not by guesswork. And if it is even slightly borderline, checking it earlier online is usually cheaper than being forced to deal with it at the gate. Number 3. Some airport systems feel mandatory, but they are not. This next change is easy to miss because most people do not even realize they still have a choice. At more than 65 airports across the United States, TSA has expanded the use of facial recognition cameras through what is called the CAT-2 system. Most travelers walk up, Look at the camera and assume it is simply part of flying now. They treat it like taking off their shoes or handing over an ID, something automatic, something required. But that is not actually the full story. The facial scan is optional. You can opt out and request a manual ID check instead, without being denied screening or pushed into extra hassle just for saying no. And that matters because many travelers are going along with a system they never consciously agreed to, simply because nobody stops to explain that another option still exists. What makes this important is not just privacy, it is awareness. Airports are becoming more digital, more automated, and more dependent on systems that feel official the moment you see them. But in 2026, one of the most useful things a traveler can know is this: not everything that looks mandatory actually is. So if you are uncomfortable with facial recognition, be direct and calm. Just tell the TSA agent you want to opt out and use a manual ID check. It may add a few extra seconds, but it lets you move through the process on your own terms. Number 4. A small ID problem can turn into a big airport problem. This next issue feels small right up until the moment it ruins your morning. Real ID enforcement is now fully active, and many travelers are still showing up to the airport assuming the license in their wallet is good enough simply because it always was before. That is what makes this change so frustrating. It does not catch careless people. It catches ordinary people who are relying on an old assumption. If your driver's license is not Real ID compliant, TSA now uses something called the Confirm ID program, which allows some passengers to verify their identity through other means and still continue to their flight. But there is a catch. It comes with a $45 fee per person paid right there at the security checkpoint. And that is the part most people never hear about in advance. Nobody wants to discover an ID problem while standing in line watching the clock and hoping the issue does not turn into a missed flight. That kind of stress is avoidable, but only if you check before travel day. So take a moment now, not later. Look at your license. If it has the required Real ID marking, you are fine. If it does not, this is one of those problems that is much easier to fix at the DM5 than at airport security. Number 5. In 2026, last-minute travel habits are riskier than before. This next change matters because it punishes a habit many travelers have gotten away with for years, cutting it close. On February 27th, 2026 United quietly updated its domestic check-in policy. Passengers without checked bags now need to check in at least 45 minutes before departure. The old cutoff was 30 minutes. That may not sound dramatic, but at the airport, 15 minutes can be the difference between boarding your flight and watching the door close without you. What makes this so frustrating is how easy it is to miss. It was not a headline change. It was buried in the contract of carriage, which means many people will not know about it until they are already depending on the old rule. And that is the real problem in 2026. A confirmed reservation does not protect you if you miss a quiet timing rule. You can have your ticket, your phone, and your boarding pass ready and still lose your seat simply because you were working from yesterday's schedule. The lesson here is bigger than one airline. Travel is becoming less forgiving of last-minute habits. So if you tend to push the clock and trust that you will squeeze through like before, this is the year to stop. Give yourself more margin than you think you need, because once the rule changes, the old habit becomes the risk. Number 6. Fees, claims, and proof. The hidden paper trail of modern travel. This next change may not sound dramatic at first, but it affects the part of travel people usually notice only when something goes wrong, the moment money is involved. Between January and March 2026, Delta, United American, and Alaska all quietly raised checked bag fees in some cases by $5 or $10 per bag each way. On paper, that may seem minor. But for families' round trips or anyone checking more than one bag, those quiet increases add up fast. And that is only part of the problem. In early 2026, Delta also tightened its internal lost baggage claims process. Documentation requirements became stricter. Approval timelines got longer, and the burden of proof shifted more heavily onto the traveler. In other words, if your bag disappears, it is no longer enough to simply say what was inside. You may need receipts, purchase dates, and clear evidence of value before your claim is fully accepted. That is why modern travel now requires a paper trail most people never think to create. Before you fly, check the airline's baggage fee page the same day you book and keep a screenshot. And before you check a bag, take a quick photo of what is inside. It takes less than a minute, but if something goes wrong, that one habit can protect you far better than memory ever will. Number 7. Borders refunds and the new digital travel reality. The final shift is broader than one airline or one airport rule. It is the feeling that travel itself is becoming more digital, more technical, and less forgiving for people who assume the old system still works the same way. Take the 3-1-1 liquids rule. Despite all the online claims that it is fading away, it is still fully in effect in 2026. Yes, some airports now use CT scanners that allow travelers to leave liquids and laptops inside their bags, but that technology is not available everywhere yet. So unless you know for certain your airport uses those lanes, it is smarter to pack as if the older screening rules still apply. International travel is changing too. Europe's entry/exit system, known as EES, launched in late 2025 and becomes mandatory by April 10, 2026, meaning travelers entering or leaving much of Europe will go through digital biometric processing instead of a simple passport stamp. And later in 2026, ETIAS will add another pre-travel authorization step for many U.S. visitors going to Europe. At the same time, refund protections are better than before, but they still work best when travelers keep screenshots, receipts, and proof of delay or disruption tools like MPC Global Entry and Clear can help, but only if you understand what they do and where they apply. That is the real pattern behind travel in 2026. Convenience is expanding. Automation is expanding. Digital systems are expanding. But preparation still matters more than ever, because the travelers who move through this new system with the least stress are not always the fastest. They are the ones who already know where the friction points are before they leave home. If there is one thing this video makes clear, it is that travel in 2026 is no longer something you can approach on autopilot. The biggest problems are not always the obvious ones. They are the quiet changes people never see coming. A baggage fee that was not there before, a carry-on rule that is suddenly enforced, an ID issue that shows up at the checkpoint, or a deadline that matters more than it used to. That is why so many ordinary travelers get caught off guard. Not because they are careless, but because they are relying on habits that made sense before the rules changed. And that is really the lesson here. In 2026, the travelers who avoid the most stress are not always the most experienced. They are the ones who double-check what changed before they leave home. So before your next trip, take a few extra minutes. Check your ID, measure your bag, review the fees, confirm the timing, save the proof. Because the easiest way to protect your trip now is not to react faster at the airport. It is to arrive already prepared.